Yes, now I got a lot of stuff from Moser. Among other things, this socket, and this looks rather high quality. It's quite heavy and should be placed this way. See if it fits. Yeah, it fits nice. And I also got a lot of other stuff from Moser, so I was thinking of just populating the rest of this this board, and I can make some commentaries as I go along, and I will just solder in what's missing here. And I also got the connectors for the back of the machine, and here I ordered all new parts, as I'm not sure if the old ones will fit or not. But this one is an S-video contact that I had from before, and it fits rather nice. And some of the components I actually found before, so we're just going to solder up everything that we can fit to this board, and I will do this in 10 times speed, and we can make some commentary as we go along. And first we solder in this socket, and we use this plastic bag as a support to keep it weighted down or rather weighted up when we do the soldering. I will just tag along these sockets first, and then I solder in everything afterwards when I'm finished, as I've done with the rest of the sockets. I use the parts list as I go along to make this easier. C92, 93, and that was 92, and that was 93. I think they stand alongside the crystals to take away some resonant frequencies. C85, oh, that's 83, C85, there it was. 10-pin resistor networks, and I'm not sure about these. This is 4K7 bus networks, but there should be 3 of them. Maybe I missed one. I take these afterwards. This is the power connector. This is the fuse, and this should be here, and it does not fit in these holes. Yes, it does, but not very well. I will wait with that too, because it sticks a bit above the PCB. 1.5 or 1500 picofarads. That's this one, C81. 330 picos, C82 to 84. This should be these 3 here. This is 10 micro, and there should be 3 of them. Okay, another bag. This is typically Moser. They have a lot of excess plastic when they're packing. I'm not sure I do like that, or I'm sure I don't like that. And this was the 10 microfarad MLCs, and it's C68 to 70. I'm not sure I've seen those. Okay, there was C69. I do wonder if this also was meant to be used by some other type, because there is a plus on this board and the MLCCs are not polarized as far as I know. That was 69, and I have 78 and 68 and 70. There is 70 and 68. There is 68 on this other side of the board. This is 4.7 pico. That should be C94. Probably also alongside an oscillator. C94 is this one, and here I actually have a solder blob. How did I manage that? I probably had some fault when I soldered this the first time. C94. 33 picofarads. C86 and 87. There's 87 and 86 right below it. I have an oscillator, 21.4772. And this is the one that should stand below here. And I just cut the legs a bit so they won't stand out and make them break if there are some twists to the legs when I've turned this board around sometimes. Here I have the crystal that should be 32768 Hertz. Normal for a clock. And this should be soldered, so that I should have a lead on top of it, and it should be something like this, I think. Just like so. I also have here the battery holder, and it's like so, I think. And I just take the opportunity to solder in the components I've placed so far and just cut the legs. And although I already found some black 220 micro capacitors, I just have to use these blue ones. And these blue ones also have the right size between the legs here so that it's easier to make them fit. But these are really beautiful blue capacitors. I give them an extra push when I solder to make them flush with the board. And next up here is 3 10-pin 9 resistor 0.7K bus arrays. And I can only find 2, so I suppose I ordered the wrong amount from Moser, but that we will fix later. I solder on the 2 I got here first. And these here are just a walk in the park. Just remember that bus resistors do have a pin 1. This relay is not the original part number from the boom, but it should fit. It's a different manufacturer, but it does have the same pinout and is a 5-volt coil on this, so it should in theory work just fine. This fast forwarding might make this look easier than it really is, but of course, as we are filling up the boards, there is less and less available positions to put things in, so it's getting easier and easier to find the right place on the board. Normally I don't measure out resistors so carefully, but it's stated special that this should be a 1% tolerance unit. And this is about R10. It's noted that in the PAL version R9 should be 16K, but we get to that later. But I do have some resistors here from Alpha, and this is a really old supply of 20K resistors. It's the first time I think I bought anything from the E24 series and not just E12 resistors. And these are stated as 1% tolerance units, and they actually measure about 3% off, and that's quite much. And I wonder if it's because of age or something else. So I do take a second measurement on this, and there is actually some different between the units in this bag. And I end up using a newer 20K that measures exactly from another batch. And now it's time to measure out 16K resistor that we need to place, and as a PAL system it should be 16K, not 20K as in the parts list. And what we have to consider here is that there is no such thing as a 16K resistor in the E24 series of resistors. So I'm going to do a coupling in series of a 15K and 1K, and I do some experiments here and measure out what's the best combination of several different candidates. And here I actually go through quite a lot of resistors, and I do solder them together to make sure that the corrosion on the legs of the resistors don't come into factor here when I do measure. And I calibrated this against the scope fluke met, and this fluke 117 measures about the same, and the difference occurs about the second digit to the right of the decimal marker, so I think it's accurate enough. And I think I measured this as 16.02 on the scope meter and 0.3 on the 117. And as I did a fault and only ordered 2 of these 4K 10-pin resistor networks, I have to do some sheeting again. And this time I use a 9-pin network and just add an extra 4.7K resistor that I solder alongside with the network. The end result is exactly the same, except for the aesthetics, of course. Now it's again time for some capacitors, and this is C91 that stated 74 picofarad in the boom, but it stated that this should be 18 picofarad for PAL support. And I do have some 18 picofarad capacitors, but they all measure out the wrong value, and I finally find one that is 22 picofarad, but that's the closest I get. So as a start I do use the 22 measurement one, and I solder it in, but not as close to the board that it should be easy to change it afterwards. And from here on it's mostly the larger connectors and the pin headers and jumper sockets that is spread all around the board. And I do try to start out with the easier ones, but there is a lot and lots of jumper blocks on this board, and some of them I have soldered in with permanent jumpers, and that is the ones that is meant to select if it's PAL or NTSC or if it's a different kind of chip that is used. This I have just soldered in a permanent jumper link. Otherwise I tend to use all the options on the board with all the jumpers in place. And also these connectors for the edge, it's layout of the PCB, and the component that was on the boom fits exactly to the right socket. I did have a bit of confusion here because I didn't know which of the cinch socket should go where, but the yellow one is the one that should go for the composite video, I think, as that's quite a normal color, and the white for audio. This printer connector I am not familiar with, and I don't have any other plugs to plug into this, but I do solder it in, even though it probably would have been easier for me to leave this unsoldered and just solder leads or something if I were going to try this against the printer. But that is something I have to investigate further when I have finished up the board. These DIN connectors from Oser is certainly of a higher quality than the last ones I ordered from some China outlet, and they are quite easy to solder in, and they seem to be very accurately made. I am not very familiar with the cartridge connectors on an MSX computer, but it's a very good design that you actually can connect more than one cartridge and can have them occupy different memory spaces. But there doesn't seem to be any way to see which orientation these should go in, and this is also quite high quality and ordered from Moser. The DB9 connectors are the last of the big edge connectors that should be on this board. And when I say edge connector, I don't mean an actual edge connector. I mean a connector that is around the edge of the board and meant for connecting external devices. And they are joystick connectors, and this is also quite high quality connectors, and this I actually ordered from DigiKey some time ago. And I'm finished soldering on the keyboard. Otherwise I probably would have reconsidered this, because there is an option to have the keyboard plugged directly into the board here, just with some higher connectors. And the way this is done with this design is that you use a cable in between them. And as I am out of 4.7K resistor networks of any size, I leave the RR10 open for the moment, but it's stated that it's optional. And this 2x20 pin, not header but socket here, is meant for memory expansion, and I do have this, and we solder it in, even though I never think I'm going to use it. And from here on out is just pin headers, and all these pin headers is broken from one piece of 1x40 pin header that's China order from some time ago, and I use a blue one just to freshen up the colors a bit. And this one is a bit troublesome to solder in, but I managed by just soldering and tagging one point and adjusting them afterwards as I go. And finally, that's the last of the single or double row pin headers. And now I'm just going to solder up every one of the pins on the back that we have not soldered yet. And remember, all of the big sockets and other stuff, we have just tucked them in, so it's only 4 or 6 pins or somewhat that's soldered. So now we have to solder down everything else. And that I'm going to do at 10 or 15 times speed. Let's see how fast we manage to do it. And remember, this terrible noise is what we have replaced with music here. And after soldering all of this, there are some cleaning up to do. Among other things, part of the pins on the socket with a narrow pin width, 1.7 millimeter or so, they are soldered together, that we fix easily with some solder wick. And also when you solder at this speed, you kind of sometimes fill in too little solder, and that's not necessarily a bad thing with these high quality boards where everything is via'd together. But in some cases you want the holes to be really filled up with solder and leave the kind of nice volcano shape on top. As I've stated many times earlier, I don't necessarily use separate flux. I use solder wick, a solder that has a very high flux content, and this rosin flux of course leaves quite a bit of residue when you solder anything with this many holes, and this needs to be cleaned away. And for this I'm using some isopropanol. This time it's the red variant. It's kind of not isopropanol at all, actually. It's some kind of alcohol that's containing some red dye. That doesn't matter much. I'm going to clean it away afterwards anyway, but this is loosening the flux in the same way as isopropanol. You can see from the yellowing of the paper that this actually works, and I'm going to just rinse this under running water afterwards just to clean off the last bits. And now it's time for a more Zen kind of work. I'm going to put the keycaps on top of the keys on the keyboard. And I actually got some cheap keys from AliExpress and they arrived today. And this was the cheapest all-key keycap set I could find on AliExpress, and it does contain some extra keys because this is for a full PC keyboard and it has some special arrangement where there are two different enter keys and so on. And I don't expect the best quality or whatever, but I do think that I will get the keys I need. And you have to consider one more thing, and that is that I have not made any special arrangements for the space key, and the space key really should have some special support underneath, and I've done nothing about that yet. Let's try to see if we can get this populated. Yeah, for me the month of January has been quite busy, so that means I'm a bit behind and delayed on this project, but that actually makes some of the things that I was not thinking of arriving in time actually do arrive in good time, as these keycaps that arrived. And now I also got my 7407 chips, so that means I can fully populate the keyboard with both chips, and then the only thing left for this keyboard to be somewhat operational is to make the cable afterwards. And here are the spare keycaps that was left after making this keyboard. They might make for another nice project in the future. And that's the board. And I do have some standoffs and stuff to make the keyboard fit above here. I will look into that, and I have to make the keyboard cable. And luckily also the EEPROMs arrived, and I can't even tell you how disappointed I am about this packaging. This is not an anti-static bag, and this is not some anti-static styrofoam either. So this is actually not protected at all. There is nothing here to protect the chips, but there are at least two things to damage them. Because rubbing plastic against plastic creates high levels of static charge, and also putting these chips into non-conductive material like this with metal to this plastic here also creates some static charge. And these are chips that's coming from, these are bought from eBay. I bought another batch from AliExpress, and these are not original new on-shelf part. You can actually see that they've been tinned here, but otherwise they look quite okay. So I'm going to test these in the Mini Pro programmer to see if they actually work. I did order another batch, so I do have 5 more of these. And we also need to program the GAL chips. And for those of you remember, a month back we started this series with showing off this collection of ICs here. That was things that I took out of my collection to collect here to make this build. And we also have to program the GAL chips here. And I did have someone leave a comment on my mail that they had problems with these exact chips. At least I think it was this, so they had to change to another brand. I do have some other chips from other brands, but I'm not really sure. I picked these ones because I thought this was the best, so I might not have that. But that is what I'm going to present to you in the next episode. I'm going to fully populate this board, and I'm going to burn the EEPROM and the GALs. And we are probably going to try to power this up for the first time. And I have not seen any procedures on this that makes me want to test it without applying some chips or somewhat. So I'm not sure. I just think I'm going to put in every chip. And I have to make a cable, or we might test this with composite video. It might be the easiest way. I will try to make this interesting, so you will follow this build to the end. On the YouTube channel, this is the 3rd upload in this series, and it's actually quite disappointing because only half of the people that has watched the first part is actually watching the second part of this series. And I do think that you are missing out on something if you are interested in this kind of builds. And I'm going to make some last remarks about this build too. And that is that it's a fairly easy build, really. It's a lot of components and lots of work. And my fast forwarding might make this look more simple than it really is. But I think it's better to use this with fast forward and show you actually how much work it's involved than just cutting away these pieces. You might comment on that if you wish, but I don't in any way try to underestimate all the work that is done with fulfilling something like this, because it takes a lot of time and you have to do some dedicated work. And if you underestimate the work that is going into something like this, you are going to give up when you meet an obstacle or you see that the months are passing by. So thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this. Please hit like and subscribe if you want to be notified when we post new videos, and see you in the next one.